Good morning and welcome to our latest Simon Talk. We have an unexpected visitor there. We are delighted today to be joined by Anna Nordgreen, who's going to be talking to us about what's happening in Denmark. We are, as you know, these Simon Talks happen on a monthly basis. And we have set them up when we started doing them. Really, it was about kind of that process of advocacy that Simon is involved in. It's, I suppose, we take up the information that we pull from a lot of sources and a lot of expertise, as well as the frontline experiences of Simon communities across the country. So we wanted to ensure or create an opportunity for people to, I suppose, have that information unvarnished, because if we think it's useful, other people and stakeholders with the Simon communities might as well. Today is slightly different. We do, through the European Federation of Homeless Services Providers, engage with a number of different agencies across Europe and do use that experience. But I suppose the talk today will talk specifically about Denmark's experience in its totality, and it's an opportunity to investigate and unpack that a little bit. So it's a learning day here for us too. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you are tweeting or using your social media, please do use the hashtag Simon Talks. That allows us to find you and sort of engage and retweet or whatever the X or whatever it is these days. Do ask. Anna will speak for about 25 minutes, so do ask questions as they occur. I will moderate and ask questions to Anna at the end, but there's a Q&A box and a chat box. If you put your questions in there as they occur to you, if you have 2 or 3 questions, that's fine. Please do. The more engagement, the better. As I say, Anna will talk for 25 minutes, and then we'll go into the Q&A at that point. So introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is Anna Nordgreen, who's the Programme Officer at Homes for All in Denmark, and has many years of experience of working with housing solutions for people in vulnerable positions. She's been on the board of a homeless organisation for a number of years, and prior to her current position, she worked in a non-profit foundation which supports housing agencies in Denmark. In Home for All, she works with municipalities and housing organisations both on a concrete, day-to-day, and on a strategic level in order to ensure legal and organisational frameworks for cooperation and long-term housing solutions for people in homelessness. Anna's going to talk about Home for All, the National Alliance working with for systemic change to end homelessness in Denmark. And it was established in 2016 for many of our attendees today, you might know, A Way Home in Canada, and also looks at a sort of a system change approach, as well as very practical approaches to addressing homelessness. So that brief introduction done, I'm now going to hand over to Anna. Anna, thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. I'm gonna share my slides with you. Just a second. Yeah. Here we go, I hope. So thank you, Wayne, for a great introduction, and good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here and to have the opportunity to share some of our experiences in Denmark with working as a coalition to end homelessness amongst youth in Denmark. My name is Anna. I work in Home for All, which is a national alliance of 22 partners with a shared goal of ending homelessness amongst youth in Denmark. Youth is defined as people under 30 years old. And we were established in 2016, working from a housing first based approach. And as you mentioned, Wayne, I work specifically with housing and how to actually strengthen the cooperation between housing organizations and municipalities in Denmark to come up with these long-term solutions, also involving civil society organizations. So who is Home for All? Home for All is not a service provider. We don't provide any services. We don't provide housing either. And we're not a municipality or local or national authority. We are a coalition of the providers. So it's our partners that take lead, not us in the administration of it. So today I will give you a brief introduction to how we work with the transition into Housing First in Denmark, what it requires. And I know that you had a presentation a couple of months ago from the Danish National Board of Social Services that talked a lot about this new homelessness reform that we've had in Denmark, which was an important milestone for us in the Home for All in Denmark in general towards this transition into Housing First. So I'll give you some highlights from working as an alliance, what it means, and how we have realized that we needed to change our strategic approach, focusing more on system change that we did in the first years. And as you mentioned, we're very inspired by Way Home Canada, but also by the work that they have done in Finland when it comes to getting an effective political framework for the transition to Housing First. So let me just give you an introduction to our partner organizations. We are 22 partners with a broad representation from different sectors. It's not about being many, but being the right organizations. So we have partners representing municipalities in Denmark, housing organizations, both the social housing, which is called non-profit housing in Denmark, and also private housing actors. And we have NGOs and service providers. And we have also interest organizations for people with lived experiences, as well as interest organizations from the municipality and the housing organization. And then we have philanthropic foundation and investors as our partners. So Home for All consists of what you could call the usual suspects, which is municipalities, social housing agencies, civil society organizations, and service providers that have been working in the field for more than 100 years maybe. But we also have some unusual suspects, such as the foundations and private investors and private housing organizations that have not prior been part of the solution in Denmark. We also have a lot of constant dialogue with the national authorities. They are not formally part of our alliance. They cannot be that because they work politically and cannot be formally part of our alliance. But we have, of course, a lot of interaction and a lot of dialogue with both the national authorities, both on an administrative and political level, because our CEO in Home for All also has another position where she refers directly to the Minister of Social and Housing in Denmark. The coalition is supported by a backbone office consisting of 5 people. We have a CEO, as I mentioned, and 3 program officers and a communication person. So what we do is that we support the collaboration between the partners, and we work for better legal and organizational frameworks for the transition into Housing First. Our backbone office is funded, and that's pretty crucial. It's funded by a private foundation that have ensured at least 10 years of working, of focus, where we don't have to fundraise a lot. We do a lot of fundraising, but not for the main positions in the backbone office. It's a private philanthropic foundation called Kubenfonden that also works strategically with system change in the different focus areas that they work within. So our aim is to end homelessness amongst youth by transforming the system. And how do we do that? First of all, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to homelessness in Denmark. We are 6 million people in Denmark, and we, according to the national count, we have around 6,000 people living in homelessness in Denmark. We're 1,600 are under 30 years old. So this count is carried out by a national social research institute that have very high legitimacy in Denmark, so we have a lot of trust in the numbers. It's based on the ethos definition that's been adapted to a Danish context. But of course, it is a now and here snapshot of the situation. The national count is carried out within a week 6 in Denmark. And of course, if you look at individuals coming in and out of homelessness, you'll probably have to double the number by 2 or 3. But when we look at where people live, they mostly live in the largest cities, but of course also in the countryside here and there. But 50%, around 50% live in shelters, 20% with family and friends, where we have the main population of young people living with family and friends, and 10% live on the street, and the rest are either in prisons, hospitals, or unknown. But when we look at the population, we see that it's definitely not only a housing problem that these people faces. It's also very complex social problems. 62% suffers from mental illnesses. 66% have substance abuse, and 42% are double diagnosed. So we're talking about a population that's characterized by many complex social problems. And most of the people are in need of intense social support in their own home. So this is the picture of homelessness in Denmark, very briefly. So now I'm gonna just introduce you to some numbers and the development we've had in homelessness in Denmark within the last 10 years. When we look at it historically, we had our first national homelessness strategy based on Housing First in 2009. And we had great experience with it, but when researchers looked into the numbers, they saw that we had an increase in homelessness by 33%, that only every third municipality worked from a Housing First-based approach. And that meant that only 8% of people in homelessness actually received a Housing First-based intervention. And what was even more worrying was that we had a significant increase by 72% in youth homelessness. And this development and these numbers were actually the reason why that Home for All was formed back in 2016, because it was very obvious that we needed a radical transformation of the existing system, that we needed a stronger collaboration between municipalities, housing organizations, and service providers. There's a lot of detail that I cannot go into here, but I mean, these were some of the historical developments that actually formed the basis of the need for a reform and also the formation of Home for All. So in the beginning, we worked very practically in Home for All. We, at that moment where we were established, we had around 2,000 people, young people living in homelessness. So we worked for 2,000 homes for 2,000 young people. That was our goal, and we primarily looked at our partners as something we could collect resources and action and intervention, or resources for action and intervention through. But soon we had to realize that we could not reach this goal, and there was a constant inflow of people coming into homelessness. So we actually needed to work for a change in the system, and we needed a national reform that introduced other financial structures, etc., that I'm going to come back to. But we needed a stronger reform that the strategies we've seen before were. And we needed also to change our view on our partners, seeing them more as ambassadors and champions for change and advocacy than primarily resources for action and intervention. So these were some of the early learnings we had in Home for All. And this led us to a focus on four main actions to actually change the system. And I'm just going to go briefly through these 4 ways of working. And they, of course, interact. So first of all, we work for building a movement, meaning that we campaign with young people, for instance, and we use much more resources on strategic communication than we did earlier. And we work with public affairs using our partners as ambassadors. And we should always remember, when I say we, I mean our partners, because we don't do anything without our partners. We coordinate our partners' initiatives. So using a lot of the resources that our partners actually come with. The second kind of activity we work with is that we develop new interventions. We work with what we call demonstration projects. For instance, we work with municipalities to test out new ways of working together. both internally within the municipality, the administration locally, and in relation to how they work together with service providers, housing organizations, etc. The third kind of activity is that we create knowledge. We take initiative to different research projects, researching, for instance, how they've worked in Finland and Norway to end homelessness, and also coming up with financial analysis, showing how we can actually work with systemic change and what that means in a financial aspect. And the fourth kind of activity we work with is that we mobilize resources, which means that we go into partnership with, for instance, social investment programs, showcasing the Housing First business model in collaboration with municipalities and housing organizations and NGOs on a local level. And we have foundation investing in the transition of shelters, for instance, to showcase their new role in the transition to Housing First. So we use these different ways of mobilizing resources to actually create also new knowledge. So the learning is that we, of course, cannot work with one action alone. These actions interact, so we cannot mobilize partners and decision makers without developing demonstration projects. And we cannot develop new models and knowledge without resources, of course. And we cannot reach our goals without the support from relevant actors. Yeah. So in this slide, I've put our four main types of activities into this triangle, showcasing a very overall visualization of systemic change. So just let me go through this triangle with you. At the top, we have the narrative and the goals at the macro level, meaning that we work with the narrative of what homelessness is and what solutions we see to homelessness. What does the research tell us to do? So we try to actually affect the whole narrative of homelessness in Denmark on a national level, which was something we put a lot of resources into prior to this new reform that we got, that I'm going to come back to. But instead of seeing this, for instance, this increase in homelessness that we saw from 2009, prior to this, to how we work today, is that that this increase in homelessness, we would normally say, okay, we need to build more shelters, but we try to inform this new narrative saying that we need more affordable housing and we need more social support, for instance. And another way we worked with the narrative was that we saw earlier that homelessness was only seen as a social problem in Denmark, and we knew from the literature and other countries that, of course, it's a housing problem as well. So informing this narrative of homelessness being both a social and a housing problem was also something we worked with strategically. At the bottom of this triangle, we see the demonstration projects that we work with, the experiments, the development of new models at the micro level that we constantly use in order to actually find out how to work with the transition into Housing First in practice. So, for instance, we test out new models of how private housing organizations, for instance, can work together with municipalities that we don't have a tradition for in Denmark. So, what does that really demand of the organizations involved, and what frameworks and new legislation do we actually need to actually build a strong and a structural model around this kind of a collaboration? So the demonstration projects we also use to affect the middle of the triangle here, which is really where the system change happens. Because in the middle of the triangle, we have the framework conditions, we have the legislation, both on national and local level. We have cultural practices, we have organizational practices, etc. at this meso level. So we use demonstration projects to affect the organization and legislation of the transition into Housing First, and we use and keep on going back to the narrative about what homelessness is all about and what solutions we need to go for. So I hope this gave you an idea of how we work with system change. And now that we have a new reform, we really look into the middle of the triangle, trying to implement this reform into new legislation on local level and new practices and the ways of working together, both nationally and locally. So this reform that we got in Denmark was actually put into place in 2021, which was for the first time like a real reform in the sense that it introduces new financial incentive structures and differs from the earlier strategies we've had in Denmark, both in the way that we have even stronger political focus and national ambition to end homelessness in Denmark, not just handle it. So this goal of ending homelessness is very emphasized. For the first time, we have a recognition that homelessness is both a social and a housing problem, which means that the Minister of Housing and the whole housing sector is very involved in the solution, both at national and local level. And we have, as I mentioned, a new financial incentive structure that's introduced through this reform, meaning that earlier municipalities could get state refund when they had cost for shelters. Now this state refund is taken away after a couple of months, is taken away from shelters and put on the social support that the municipality, either themselves or through NGO, cooperation with NGOs, actually provides in these private homes. So state refunds are taken away from these temporary solutions to a long-term solution, meaning a permanent housing and evidence-based social support. So these are very briefly some of the most significant changes from earlier strategies in Denmark to this reform that we now have. And looking into the numbers, we've seen a drop in Denmark in homelessness of 11% on all age levels, but 18% in youth. And when we look even closer to the numbers, we see that that this drop is actually carried out by a number of individual municipalities that have worked strongly with the transition to housing first. And Aarhus, for instance, which is the second largest city in Denmark, they have seen a drop of 32%. Esbjerg, which is also the largest city in Denmark, a drop of 33%. And Frederiksberg is a small municipality within the municipality of Copenhagen, which is the capital in Denmark. They've seen a drop of 52%. That's mainly due to the fact that they have a lot of housing that's owned by the municipality, so they have access to houses, which is not the case in Copenhagen, where we don't see a drop yet, even though we have 1/4 of all people in homelessness living in Copenhagen. But that's another story. Going even closer, looking even closer into these municipalities, what have they actually done? Aarhus and Odense, which is not one of the municipalities I've mentioned earlier. Odense is the municipality in Denmark where they have worked with housing first for the longest time, a period of time, like 15, maybe 20 years. They've worked with housing first. But what characterizes both Aarhus and Odense is that they have had and still have a continuous political focus and priority on homelessness and ending homelessness, especially amongst youth. And it's a political priority that's been there throughout many election periods. So it's been a continuous focus. And they have formulated very ambitious goals about ending homelessness. In Odense, they now reach for a functional zero. And they've also sought solutions through a very strong collaboration between sectors. In Odense, again, they have made a very strong and very ambitious strategic partnership with non-profit housing organizations, where they have put up a housing guarantee that all people in homelessness should have a home within 3 months. and they actually, after 5 years, they still live up to this guarantee. So it actually works. And in Aarhus, they developed a master plan where they gathered all the relevant actors to formulate a joint strategy and common goals. So those shelter organizations and housing organizations have ownership to these goals. So when we look back at this development in Denmark within the last couple of years, we can see that there's both some initiatives that come directly from our partners in Home for All, and the methodology of working as an alliance, but also, of course, we have a lot of things coming outside of Home for All. That's been an important context for the whole development we see in Denmark. Looking within the Home for All, it's definitely it has had an impact that we are a strong alliance of the most important actors in the field of fighting homelessness in Denmark, and they all work from a clear and common agenda. And we have actually mobilized our partners as very strong ambassadors for change on a national and a local level. But it's taken a long time. We've been working with this for many, many years without so many concrete successes. So you got to be patient. That's definitely some of the learnings we have taken with us. But another thing is that we've worked for a shift in focus from like this strategic change that I talked about, that we learned that we could not just work with interventions. We needed actually to work with public affairs and methodologies aiming at changing the system from within. So that's also been part of some key factors why we are here today. Also, this way of using knowledge strategically we've seen have had an impact. We took initiative to a financial analysis that actually measured what the cost would be if we continued versus made this transition to housing first, and we could actually demonstrate that there were a financial incentive to actually go for this reform, and that was presented just before our national politicians were to vote for this new reform. So I think that the fact that we through our partners we present as decision makers for new knowledge was actually something that had an impact. And then the whole fact of involving stakeholders from across sectors and involving them directly in the preparation and putting up concrete recommendation for government strategy was also a very important aspect of our work. So keeping our stakeholders aligned and coordinating what messages were sent to decision makers and politicians at the right timing was quite crucial. But of course, we don't work of course, we work in a society with many initiatives all over, and we knew that there was a strong political focus on youth homelessness. It's been a priority since 2015. We saw that some local communities, especially in Odense, were really demonstrating success. So we pushed their experience in the front, and then there was, of course, an element of opportunity and timing, where this political focus on the national strategy of homelessness in 2021 was definitely something we could hook our initiatives to. So if we should put up some lessons learned, I would say that identifying strong and attractive partners is crucial. I should start with the beginning. To this fact about having a clear and common agenda and vision is crucial when you run an alliance. This whole work with identifying strong and attractive partners and getting them on board, and especially these unusual suspects, I think made it interesting for government institutions to go into dialogue with us. That we suddenly came with foundation investors, private housing organizations that they didn't have any contact with was one of the reasons why they found us interesting and relevant to go into dialogue with. And then the whole work with spending time to establish the alliance is crucial, building relationship between our partners so they actually could build some trust. And also the whole work of defining the problem together with our partner organizations was a crucial activity as well. And how to keep our partners engaged throughout so many years, because it's a long process. It takes very long time. We learned that we needed to have some short-term impact interventions with short-term impact that could actually keep our partners committed in the long run. So this is one of the things that we can that we have learned throughout the process, that it's very important to have these short-term impact interventions that can really motivate our partners to keep being engaged in this work. And then, as I mentioned, we use knowledge strategically to promote a common agenda and influence policy, which is also one of the lessons what we learned is very important. And then we should always remember that change happens through our partners. It's not the backbone office that leads anything. We just coordinate our partners' engagement in ending homelessness. But just my last slide here, it's definitely something with a lot of power to collect the most important actors and coordinate a coalition of actors. But we are of course not there yet. As I showed you, we are on the right track. But there's a lot of work to be done in order to implement the reform and actually support local municipalities, housing organizations, and NGOs to find solutions that suit specifically to their local community. So this is why we have changed our strategy now in Home for All, supporting through our partners, supporting the local transition into housing first. But as I showed to you, we see some promising developments, but there's a long way to go still. We still have around these 6,000 people, 1,600 people, young people living in homelessness in Denmark. So this is what we are going to focus on in the next couple of many years to support as best as we can through our partners the local transition into housing first. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
That was really interesting and informative, and also a lot of, I think, crossover and commonality with the Irish experience. I'm particularly struck by 2021 seeming to be, with the reform seeming to be a turning point. Yeah. I'm just wondering, I have a sense here in Ireland that there was, that across Europe actually, coming out of COVID, having seen, and I think this was the same in Denmark, but you might correct me, there was a fall, particularly in family homelessness over that period, and municipalities, local authorities and NGOs really saw that the impact, one of the few silver linings of COVID was that homelessness fell because we have the solutions, which is you stop it, people coming into homelessness, and you support people out, and then homelessness falls. And I'm just wondering if that was if I'm right, and that was the sense in Denmark, was that period of crisis an impetus for change, or is it rather that obviously there was a lot of groundwork done? So just that interaction of the time, what was the spark that drove that momentum forward?
I think in terms of what you call it, universal prevention, we're quite strong in Denmark because we have like a large non-profit housing sector that creates a lot of opportunities for getting access to affordable housing in Denmark that we don't see in many countries in Europe. It's 20% of all Danes living in non-profit housing, also people that are not vulnerable. So we might have seen a fall throughout COVID-19. I'm not sure about that. I would have to ask our researcher that does these counts, but it's not been part of the interpretation of the fall that we've seen from our researchers. So my assumption would be, because we see only a fall that's carried out by certain municipalities that have worked specifically with Housing First. It's not a general fall in homelessness in Denmark, but it's carried out by these certain specific municipalities, which would give me a hint, at least, that it's not a general development, but a specific development that's connected directly with the political focus and the instruments that they evolve from there. That's my best response to that question.
And what do you think has driven that, I suppose, the political momentum?
What have driven that momentum in the specific municipalities? I think that there was a lot of preparation before this new reform. So we had a lot of dialogue for many years with many actors, putting a quite strong focus on Housing First. So I think a lot of decision makers, both on national and local political and authorities at both national and local level, they knew that this transition into Housing First was coming up, and they knew many years before this reform was actually decided that there would be some economic incentives to actually do this transition. So I think it was a mix of knowing that something is coming up that's going to affect our economic situation in the municipalities, with also some political visions that certain politicians really wanted to stop homelessness in their own city. So I think that's some of the reasons why we saw that some municipalities started this process even 2, 3, 4 years before the reform was actually introduced.
Okay.
But but what we're looking into now, we have we've just had the national count has been carried out every second year. So we're awaiting the next numbers for 2024. And what we've of course hoped for a drop, and even a larger drop. But what we hear is that there might not be a drop, because so many municipalities now look more, have more focus on this whole area. So they might find a lot of people living in hidden homelessness that they haven't been focusing on earlier. So we don't know. I mean, we're very excited about what this drop will actually tell us about how we work with transition in Denmark at the moment. But that might be the situation that we actually see an increase. Okay. We don't know. We'll share that knowledge with you when it comes in the fall.
Very good. Absolutely. And sorry, I should say, people do put your questions into the Q&A or the chat. I'm abusing my position at the moment, but I'll continue to do so. I mean, that's quite interesting. I mean, one of the phenomena that can happen is that actually, as you start to provide the solutions, you find that element of hidden homelessness, it becomes more important. It's always important, but becomes more evident, because people see that there are solutions and sort of come out from the hidden nature of that housing exclusion and actually present to the local authority, because they now feel that there are solutions for them. I think that's really interesting, that you'll start to see that potentially that's what you could see that in the numbers. That's quite interesting. And it'd be, I suppose, the way that the count is done, that actually might be knowable in the Danish context, because you can actually identify where the hidden homelessness has become present, as opposed to maybe shelter numbers increasing.
Yeah, we do count people they're not living in shelters, but of course there's always like a certain amount of the people that are still not known by local authorities.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if I can bring it back to talk a little bit about the coalition and sort of how that came about, and I suppose some of the actors in it. I mean, it seems to be a very broad coalition, despite, as you say, you've gone with who should be in the coalition rather than trying to make it as big as it could possibly be. I suppose one of the sort of unusual aspects of it in the Irish context, I think you described them as the usual suspects and the unusual suspects. So the unusual would include kind of mainstream housing providers and investors, and I think that is an interesting dynamic. And how did that come about, and what do you think it has added to the endeavors?
Yeah, in terms of, I mean, we primarily have philanthropic foundations, but we do also have some organizations or foundations that work with investments, and then we do have partnerships that are not part of our alliance, but we still do have partnership with organizations that work with social investment programs. And in terms of the private housing organizations, we just had dialogue with some private organizations that had interest in being part of the solution. And we don't have a tradition for that in Denmark because it's quite divided. The non-profit housing sector has to, I mean, it's a legal obligation that they have to give every fourth apartment to the local authority. That's part of the model in Denmark. So we have a constant inflow of apartments to municipalities. But this interest amongst private housing organizations, we had to follow that and figure out, and we're still in the process of figuring out if they can play a role, because of course they have higher rents that the non-profit housing organizations have. So what type of role can they play? And what kind of legal framework do we need to have for this cooperation? But because they don't have any tradition at all of working with municipalities, at least not the social department in the municipalities. So just, facilitating this dialogue between private housing organizations and municipalities, actually trying to figure out what world do these organizations actually live in, and what's at stake for them, is a long process. And then figuring out what legislation do we have, and is that legislation actually sufficient? And it's not. So how can we get back to our Minister of Social and Housing Affairs and actually have a dialogue with her about what changes we need if we want to have private housing organizations involved in this solution? And specifically in Copenhagen, there's a housing crisis in a way, and at least in terms of affordable housing. So what sort of solutions can we actually develop in Copenhagen? That's really something we struggle with, and we don't have solutions at the moment. So we need all actors that have just a little bit of interest in this involved.
Okay.
But in general, we use a lot of energy on these social investment programs, because many municipalities don't have the resources up front to actually initiate this transition, and then we can use this money to actually create a space for these experiments and this whole transition of how the municipality work, both within different departments, but also how they work strategically with housing organizations and NGOs.
Okay, so that's really the demonstration model notion. So you show them it'll work, and then they can get less when you take away the risk. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And you raise an interesting, I suppose, element to it in the Danish context. Obviously, the municipalities have much more autonomy than they would in the Irish context, and they're much more autonomous, particularly when it comes to housing. And my understanding is that sort of the national government plays less of a role in that for that very reason. But it seems to be a very important partnership, the one you have with on the legislation front, with the national government in terms of this coalition and what, as you said, the new reform that came in 2021. Mm-hmm. How does firstly, are there tensions between municipality and central government? And how is that managed, given that the municipalities are part of the alliance? How does that unpick itself, and how do you approach the minister for that kind of change, which may impact the municipality who are part of the alliance? So how is that sort of contradiction met?
Well, there have been some conflict between national government and and local authorities in Copenhagen, because the introduction of this reform really makes it much more expensive for municipalities to only offer shelter solutions to people in homelessness. And with the housing market we have in Copenhagen, it's really difficult for municipalities to actually offer long-term solutions. So they wanted this reform to be introduced in phases, slowly. But then that was national government. They were just like, no way, we're going to introduce it. We're going to stick to the plan and introduce it right away. So that was one conflict we had. We also had some conflicts between the municipalities' interest organization, which is called KL in Denmark, which is like the interest organization of all municipalities towards the government. And they wanted to, for instance, have a legal, what do you say, like they could just demand all the affordable housing from housing organizations. They wanted a legal framework where they could basically just take away all the affordable housing for homelessness specifically, whereas the housing organization said, oh, stop, we have a regular waiting list. We do have people that have put their names on a waiting list for 20 years. We cannot take away all the affordable housing for the fight against homelessness. So we had some conflict there as well, where we had to like bridge the solutions and find a solution that everybody was actually in support of. So these are some of the conflicts that we had introducing this reform. And then we had some other things that are not perfect at all in this reform, because the state refund, it only covers people that have been in shelters, and young people are typically not in a shelter. They are just with family and friends, couch surfers and so. So what are the municipalities' incentives to actually support this kind of group? Because there's not an economic incentive to actually prioritize young people, for instance. So there's a lot of tension, and there's a constant, we have all our partner organizations don't share interests, and they are not aligned in terms of their regular work for specific sector-specific interests. So it's a constant work of leading this whole coalition and remembering why we actually became part of Home for All, and what goals we actually work for, despite our different interests. So
okay,
it's,
so it really
it's
is
never something. It's
yeah,
never
yeah.
something that just happens. It's something that we constantly work with, and we have to be like 3-4 steps ahead of these potential conflicts in order to actually ensure that people are aligned.
Okay, so it is holding that North Star of a overall goal. Yeah, absolutely. And can I ask, I suppose one of the things that raises its head in the Irish context when we see these kind of really innovative direct action solutions, so providing homes, is particularly when you talk about the more general homeless population. I know that's slightly different in Denmark, but this sort of perception of people making themselves or presenting as homeless in order to get the social homes or whatever. And have you had to contend with that in terms of the alliance?
Well, it's the local authorities that define who is homeless and who is just in lack of a home, of a house. I mean, so we have a clean division between homelessness and people needing a house. And it's local municipalities would only define somebody as homeless if they have some sort of social problems plus their need for a house. So it's actually defined in the legislation, and it's being practiced in the local municipalities' definitions when they actually look into this specific person's social situation. So there will not be people considered homeless that don't have social problems.
Okay. Yeah. And do you just out of interest, when somebody applies to a municipality for social housing, is there kind of an average wait time Do we know what that is?
That differs.
Okay.
That totally depends if you live in a larger city or if you live in the countryside. And there's a great variety of the housing market in Denmark, as you probably have as well in Ireland. And I mean, at the very countryside, a private rental home will typically be less expensive than a non-profit housing organization, because
Okay.
the non-profit housing organization will be renovated from money from a national foundation of the non-profit housing organization. So they will ensure a certain standard of quality, whereas private rental apartments can be any kind of quality, so to speak. Whereas in the larger cities, the private rental houses will be very, very expensive. So it differs. And some places they have waiting lists that are like 20 years in Copenhagen, for instance, again. And in the countryside, there'll be availability just, if you just contact them. So that's a great variety. But the problem is that, of course, people belong to a certain municipality, and the municipality can't just say, well, go to the other municipality and get some solutions there. They cannot do those kinds of social exports, so to speak. So they need to find solutions within their own municipality, which creates very different barriers in order to make this transition.
And that again speaks to the supply issue. If you're when you're doing housing first, fundamentally you need the homes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're coming to the end. We might wrap it up there. Anna, I want to thank you again for a really interesting conversation and for your presentation. It was I think there's an awful lot to digest in it, so I think we'll spend some time unpacking that. But also, if you're happy, we'll maybe share your slides.
Sure.
With the participants, and as people know, this goes up on YouTube as well and is available to the wider audience. I want to thank everyone for coming along today, and with that, we will say enjoy the rest of your week and day.
You too.
Thanks again, Anna.
Thank you.